Hi, I'm Julie Strickland, and I'm here to talk about Lunar Innovations. These are all stories from my book, Strawberry Innovation. So first, we're going to talk about the patent life cycle, and that is on this agenda 3 times, and that's on purpose. And we're going to talk about one way to go through the patent life cycle. We're going to review and talk about what we did, and then we're going to talk about a different way to go through the patent life cycle. And then we're going to compare and contrast those different paths. As part of that, I'm going to explain a couple of patents to you that came from different inspiration and were created with different co-inventors. And somewhere in the middle, we'll talk a little bit about me, and I'll tell you why I, in particular, am here today. Now, if you do a search on U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO website, you'll get on my name in particular, you'll get a list that looks like this. Pretty impressive, right? Well, let's just give a dose of realism to this. Some of those are patent applications that were dead ends. Some of those were patent applications associated with fully awarded patents that are on this list, and some of those are still pending. So I do have at least 6 fully awarded U.S. patents and about a dozen internationally associated with those same systems. So I'm pretty proud of the work I've done and the teams I've worked with have done. But that little snapshot, a little bit misleading, so I wanted to make sure you understood the story behind it. The patent life cycle actually has 10 full steps plus the 0th. But today we're going to concentrate on the first 6, including the 0th. So the 0th is problem identification. You really need to find a good problem to solve in order to have a valuable system at the end of the process. For example, if you make a better mousetrap that costs $10,000, it might be amazing, but nobody's going to want to buy it when they can buy a $1 or a $10 system that performs the same work and solves the same problem. So that's why problem identification is the 0th step. Now, if you already have an idea, you might go to the first step, which is ideation. Ideation includes research and iteration and brainstorming. Then we move on to the invention disclosure, which is a summary of the item that you're designing. And that invention disclosure goes to a subject matter expert for review. That subject matter expert is answering 2 main questions. 1, is anybody else doing this? And 2, is it feasible? The SME can add a lot of other goodness too, can help with improvements, can ask questions that may lead to more improvements. But at the end of the day, those 2 questions are the most important for the SME. If the SME agrees that it is a unique invention and that no one else is doing it and that it is feasible, then it will go on to the PRC or the Patent Review Committee. That's in a large company. If it's a small company, you might not have a PRC. If you're a sole inventor in your garage, ask yourself the same questions that are in the book evaluating good ideas. And I say this because we all have limited budget and limited time, and so we need to invest those resources wisely. If the PRC or your business case shows that you should move forward, then the patent application is the very last step. Again, on this list, in the book, I go further. But today, we're going to concentrate here. So the team and I asked ourselves, what can we do with the resources on the moon? We're looking forward to the time when people are living on the moon in a lunar habitat. Well, how can we make that lunar habitat self-sustaining? Well, if they can use in situ resources or resources found there on the moon, then they're more likely to be successful and need less deliveries from Earth. So looking at the lunar regolith, or the loose debris on the surface of the moon, we looked at the characteristics. Side note, you can use the word dust or dirt to describe regolith. The geologist will argue with you and tell you that those are certain words that have certain meanings and certain sizes of particles. But for our purposes here, I use regolith, dust, and dirt interchangeably. Thank you for understanding. So what can you do with moon dust? It's charged. It has various minerals, which, by the way, some of which are also found here on Earth, like feldspar. It's thermally conductive. Oh, wait, that last one's pretty interesting. Thermally conductive. Now that's the regolith or the loose debris only. The bedrock, which is solid, is insulative. So that has other uses. But we're concentrating on the regolith, the loose debris, and that is jagged and nasty. It'll wear holes in suits. Oh yes, it has worn a hole in spacesuits. Alan Bean came home with a hole in his spacesuit. Wasn't big enough to let enough air out that it caused a problem, but there was a hole. And it also defeated the Velcro on the Apollo astronauts' suits. So that moon dust we want to keep out of our equipment. But again, we're concentrating on the thermally conductive part of it. So how thermally conductive is it? Looking back at the information that the Apollo astronauts collected, we see that several centimeters below the surface, it gets cooler. Okay, I think in inches, so I converted this. About 19.5 inches below the surface, you get some really good delta T. And delta T meaning there's a change in temperature from the surface. So the surface is hot, it's colder down at 19.5 inches. Might be colder still further down, but the amount of regolith varies from place to place, so this is really going to be site dependent. But knowing that we have heat that can dissipate into the regolith, well, quite frankly, what do we do with that information? We had to brainstorm. The team and I asked ourselves, well, what do you do with lower subsurface temperatures here on Earth? I say here on Earth because that's where I've been. I haven't been to the moon yet. So here on Earth, we've used cold cellars for wine, for vegetables before refrigeration. All right. In the desert areas on Earth, people have dug trenches and put air through those trenches because it is cooler subsurface, so the air cools, and then they can pump it back into their habitat or their house, and that's a form of air conditioning. So that's interesting. Why would somebody on the moon need air conditioning? Well, right now, astronauts only have radiation for heat dissipation. Let's talk about that for a minute. In physics, we learned that there are 3 main ways to get heat out of a system. There's conduction, which requires touch. Out in the vacuum of space, there's nothing to touch, so you can't do conduction. There's convection, which requires a fluid, and in this case, air is considered a fluid. Physics is fun like that. Well, there's no air or water or other fluid in the vacuum of space, so that's off the table. So that leaves radiation. So as you see, the astronaut suits are actually white. That's partially for the reflective version, the reflective properties, and also to radiate heat. Well, radiation is a function of surface area. So the larger the area, the more radiation you have. So we don't want to put a big radiator on the astronaut. However, on the surface of the moon, that's an option, right? We've got plenty of real estate that hasn't been planned. However, when you make big things, you need lots of materials. So if you can use less materials, you have less materials to ship to the moon, and that's less expensive and better. Therefore, the team and I thought, well, if we had pipes or hoses running under that regolith, then they could get some of the heat out of the habitat and it would use less surface area. So we came up with this sketch, and I want to sit back and talk about the sketch for a minute. It is a stick figure sketch. and it was never reduced to practice. Those are two very important things. One, your sketch doesn't have to be detailed. It doesn't have to have a lot of electronics. It doesn't have to define every single piece. You'll see that there are some numbers that name different parts of this, but it's certainly not enough to actually build this object. Number two, it was never reduced to practice, by which I mean we never built a prototype. We haven't been to the moon to build this, obviously, but we haven't even built one in a lab. So that's interesting, but it's a fun fact. You don't have to build it in order to file a patent. So Sam Anderson and Jake Rohrig were my co-inventors, so thank you for working on this with me. And I encourage everyone to build a team to brainstorm with and to ideate with. We all are mechanical engineers. Ideally, we'd have an electrical engineer, a software engineer, a technician. My point is people with different skill sets, and we all have different backgrounds. Jake actually lives in Connecticut, while Sam and I live in Houston, and I've actually lived all over the United States. And so we have our different backgrounds or different experiences, which all come together to form a diverse pool of thought, which makes ideas better. So thank you, Sam and Jake, for being my innovation partners on this and multiple other patent applications. Together, we came up with a business case. Okay, we were inside a large company, and the large company, again, has limited budget and limited resources. So we had to convince the company that this idea was of value to them. We came up with, well, we decided to ideate on lunar regolith because our company does work with NASA and produce equipment for them. In particular, the ECLSS, the Environmental Control and Life Support System, ECLSS for short, keeps the astronauts alive on the ISS, the International Space Station. The ECLSS conditions the air. It helps with getting the humidity out of the air. It has several different uses. But what we're concentrating on today is the fact that this equipment generates heat, like most machines do. Did you know that even your refrigerator generates heat? Yeah, if you go on the backside of your refrigerator, it's hot because it's taking heat from inside and dumping it out. ECLSS has that and other functions. So where does that heat go? If you're inside a habitat, a closed system, such as the International Space Station, you need to be able to dump that heat out. Okay? So on a lunar habitat, again, you can radiate or you can conduct the heat out. There's no convection because there's no air flowing across that habitat. So we use this information, the fact that we already had an existing customer who has equipment low Earth orbit, who is interested in going to the moon, who would theoretically use this same equipment on the moon in a lunar habitat to keep crew members alive. And we've already got a product line that would support the EHE. So there's going to be a return on investment. There's a path to recoup the profit, to get the money back from the investment of the patent in developing the product. Companies require a business case. Y'all, if you can go to a manager and say, here's how much money you're going to make, you're going to get a lot higher probability of them saying yes than if you just go to them and say, hey, this is how much money I need to develop this project. Fun fact. Sadly, Glenn Wade had this same idea back in the 70s. Glenn came up with a system for the lunar habitat that included something akin to the EHE. And we were very sad about this. But then we thought, let's reframe this. This is a good idea. Yes, somebody else had it first, but it was patented, so therefore it was a really good idea. So bravo to Mr. Wade for having that idea first and receiving the patent in 1978. This is Mr. Wade's sketch. I bring this up for several reasons. Is this one patent or many? Well, if you compare it to our patent, you would say, well, this is many, because it's not just the EHE, it's a bunch of other things too. Other systems are in here, and he talks about other things that could be included in the lunar habitat, again, with the goal of keeping people alive in the harshness of space. Well, there's pros and cons to this approach, all right? So if you're a person in the garage that's trying to get a startup off the ground, you might want to apply for multiple patents, because then you can go to your investors as a startup and say, hey, I have 100 patents in my patent portfolio. That sounds like, wow, you must be a very prolific innovator. You must do a lot of hard work. You must be very smart. However, if you're a large company and you have limited funds and you know that each patent is going to cost $20,000 over its lifetime, you might fit as much as you can into one patent application in order to conserve your funding, because you're not trying to prove yourself to anybody. You just want to protect the intellectual property, the IP. Counterpoint, the USPTO can come back and say, hey, we like your ideas, but this is really 5 different patent applications. You need to break these apart. They can say that. They can also take 2 patents and ask you to combine them. And they have for my ideas, by the way. So that's just something to keep in mind. And it's not right or wrong. It's different approaches. And like I said, USPTO is not going to outright reject a patent application for having too much on it, although they might ask you to revise it and resubmit. So let's look at this, the differences between Wade's sketch and what we submitted. Again, patent application art can be very simple, stick figure. It doesn't have to be like a CAD model, a computer-aided design model. You can have it very simple. You don't have to reduce it to practice. You don't have to build a prototype. And if somebody else has the idea first, it's still a good idea. Be proud of that. Yeah, more complex. So let's go back to the patent life cycle. Start with problem identification. If you already have an idea, skip to step 1. What we did was we started with step 0. We had a resource and we said, what can we do with it, with the goal of a lunar habitat being self-sustaining. So that was the problem we had identified. We ideated. Again, we didn't solve this. We didn't come up with this idea just like that. We thought about it. We researched how things are done on Earth. We researched Apollo's experimental findings of what subsurface temperatures are on the moon, and we iterated on the design. So you don't have to come up with an idea at the first meeting. We prepared an invention disclosure, which was just a subset of the slides we used. And I say slides because I like to use Microsoft PowerPoint. You can use Word, you can use any other documentation that you like. But when we ideated, we used PowerPoint, built a bunch of slides that had our research in there. And then for the invention disclosure, we just deleted some slides to get down to what we needed for the SME review. Met with the SMEs, got some feedback, and then submitted that to the PRC. And the PRC voted to file on that patent application. And again, in the book, there are more steps that we went through. So now we're going to go and talk about something else for a hot minute. Talk about me. I have been a mechanical engineer for about 20 years. I spent 16 of those years as in mechanical design, designing such things as the electro-optical infrared system for the Predator drone, the eyeball for the drone that flew in Afghanistan. I worked on cutting-edge radars, but one of the funnest projects I worked on was the spacesuit. I actually helped design the next generation spacesuit for 4 years. That was one of the best projects that I worked on. And as part of that, I had the chance to go into space. I actually experienced weightlessness on a zero gravity flight. So this is an airplane a 727 that goes up in a parabola, and a parabola is just a fancy word for a curve, goes up and comes down. And at the top of that parabola, we experience weightlessness. And so that's what that picture is from. So I didn't actually go to the ISS, sadly, but to experience weightlessness is pretty cool. And I do recommend it if you ever get the chance. Right now, I am a research and development project manager. I have been several other things, including an author and inventor. So I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's my URL right there. I love to hear from people and connect with other inventors. I wrote a book because I've been teaching others how to get patents. And because I've been developing this curriculum on my own time and teaching junior engineers as a volunteer, I said, well, I'm just going to document everything that I've learned and everything that I've been teaching for the past few years. And it became a book, Strawberry Innovation. So it's actually available on Amazon.com in Kindle and paperback formats, should you choose to buy it. And you can find a link through strawberryinnovation.org, which tells more about me and my company and my services as an innovation coach. Most people ask me, why a strawberry? Well, my friends, a strawberry represents a good idea. You'll first note that it's not a straight line. It's curved, because when we learn something, ideating, we shift our focus and we pivot and we go into a new direction. Secondly, those flecks are not flaws. Those are actually seeds, and the seeds of innovation are all around us. Next is the stem. The stem reminds us that we don't come up with ideas in a vacuum, although our ideas might be used in a vacuum. We actually have ideas that are rooted in the fertile soil of everything we've learned and our own experiences. That's the fertile soil where our ideas grow. And last but not least is timing. If you pick a strawberry too soon, nobody wants it. You pick it too late, it's rotten. Nobody wants it. So you've got to get it at just the right time. Same thing with ideas. Now let's think about Glenn Wade and his patent application. He had his idea early and he submitted it. Well, it was too green. That patent was never, that system which he patented was never built, never realized. It was a green strawberry. And it was a good idea, but it's never been realized. And so that patent actually expired before the system could be built. Something to think about. All right, let's move on to another patent application. And this one starts with the 0th step being a gap analysis list. We'll discuss tech roadmaps in Chapter 2, and this is a gap analysis. So a tech roadmap says, hey, this is where we want technology to be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, somewhere down the line. But to get there, we need to develop certain technologies. And those gaps, those technologies we need to develop, go on a gap analysis list. NASA was kind enough to publish their 2020 gap analysis list for EVAs, for spacewalks, on the internet, and we were able to go and look at that and see what NASA considers a hard problem. Now, this is gold. I mean, our customer is telling us this is what we need help with. Now, you'll see that they listed the problem and then they listed what they did to try to solve that problem. And the problem is for subsurface operations, the knowledge gap is open. That means they still don't know how they're going to solve this on other planets, on the Moon and Mars. So what is the problem? Incapacitated crew member. I like to use my toys when I explain this. So imagine you have a small crew member and you have a large crew member, and the large crew member has a health event. Uh-oh, they're incapacitated. They can't move. They need help. How are we going to get them back to home base so that they can get help? Well, that's the problem. Let's talk about this. So, how are people rescued on Earth? I told you for the last patent application, this is how I start every problem. Because I've been on Earth, I haven't been on the moon. So let's think about this. What would you do if I fainted? Okay, this is a video. That's not really the best example, but assume for just the case of this brainstorming session that you and I are in the same room. What would you do? Okay, same room in a city would be different if I fainted on a mountain. What would you do? Some of the answers I've heard is splash water on my face. Okay, that's a good idea, but when the crew member's wearing a helmet, there's no way to splash water on the face. Another answer would be, I'd throw you over my shoulder and rescue you with a fireman carry, ha. Well, that is a great idea, but whenever you're in a bulky suit and you might have some tools on the front of the suit, it's near impossible for one crew member to fireman carry the other. And remember, we're talking about a giant and a petite person. So, what else? Call 911? Actually, I appreciate that approach. If that happens, please call 911. But on the moon, there's nobody to call. So, what if you had a stretcher? You could actually use the stretcher to carry the other person back. And because it's a stretcher with a lever, you could potentially carry a much larger and more massive person. All right, we're talking about the moon, 1/6 of Earth's gravity. But mass is still mass, so F equals ma. Force equals mass times acceleration. So a massive person is still going to require some force to move. So what the team came up with was, with the backpack, the backpack has supports, and those supports could telescope and be pulled out, and then we could wrap some fabric around those supports to make a stretcher, and then there's a handle to pull. Also part of this idea are some wheels which would pop out. So now you don't have to carry excess equipment. It's all right there integrated into the backpack, plus portable life support system, for those who like the proper name of stuff, PLSS, plus. And you've got the wheels that pop out, you've got telescoping poles that come out, and you've got a stretcher right there integrated into the spacesuit. I'm going to pause here and shout out to my co-inventors. The co-inventors on this patent application were junior employees. And by junior, I mean they were in the first 3 years of their career. Can you imagine graduating from college and almost immediately having your name on a patent application? How amazing is that? And look at this. This is low tech. This is not high tech. There are no electronics in this. This is something that a first grader could put together. So I want you to recognize the fact that a patent doesn't have to be electronic. It doesn't have to be complex. It can be something as simple as a stretcher integrated into a spacesuit. Now, this is a huge success story because not only were we able to convince the PRC to file a patent application, but we were actually able to receive funding to see this realized. So in 2024, mechanical engineers were designing this stretcher into the next generation spacesuit. Y'all, you don't get a success much bigger than that. So big round of applause to my co-inventors. And now I'm going to tell you that that project was canceled and that company is no longer making the next generation spacesuit, but I still have hope that Airs will be integrated into a next generation spacesuit. All right, still a success in my book. So let's talk about the patent life cycle and what we just went through with Airs. We started with a problem identification. That was the gap analysis list from our customer's technology roadmap, in this case NASA's hard problems. We ideated, we brainstormed, we came up with a bunch of different solutions that I didn't show you here, and we researched the feasibility of those and how much those might weigh and what those might look like. And then we down selected to the idea that you saw here today. We created an invention disclosure, which were a few PowerPoint slides, submitted those to a subject matter expert who, y'all, he thought this was such a good idea, he fast-tracked it. Fast-tracked it. He made sure that this went in front of the patent review committee immediately. Isn't that amazing? And then we filed a patent application. Success story. So there are more steps, but again, bravo to those junior employees who worked on this idea with me. And now I'd love to hear from you. Again, connect with me on LinkedIn. Go ahead and look at strawberryinnovation.org and see what my company can do for you. I'd love for you to buy the book and let me know what you think. I'm working on the second edition now, so if your book looks a little bit different than the one on the table, that's okay. I assure you that it's just as good, maybe a tiny bit better. And there's going to be a workbook coming out later in 2025 that accompanies the book as well. Thank you for joining me here today. Happy innovating.